Hi everybody, welcome to this workshop, or the preparation for this workshop, outdoors painted studies. Okay, so the idea behind this workshop is exactly what it says in the tin. It's about study. We're not going to worry about the creation of finished paintings that will hang on a wall or anything like that. Going to be trying to break down what's in front of us and say, what can we find out? Sort of information that you get, you can gather up, and then theoretically you could take it away to your studio or your home and make paintings from it. So if someone said, look, you're not allowed to go back out to that landscape, that's it. You've at least gathered the information that you believe will give you a good study, a good painting in the end of the day. The biggest thing really is one of the big things, I should say, is the scale that you're going to be working on is going to be fairly small. Obvious reasons for that is that you can work through things quicker, and it's also more portable. It's more easy to manage, if you like. So keep that in mind. Some of you may have worked on a small scale before, or a lot. Some of you may find small scale a little bit unusual. I don't know, but a couple of things I want to go through before I get into the nitty-gritty, if you like, of making the little studies is the equipment. Okay, this is suitable for people using different media, you know, acrylics, watercolor, oils, and so on. So that you will be bringing, I trust, those particular types of paint. As far as the scale thing, going back to scale, I'm just getting here a couple of things. One of the things I'm going to be doing is preparing bits of card with primer, you know, with the gesso. For those of you working in acrylic and oils, you can see, I hope, from the size of that, that's, I think, A5 or something like that, thereabouts. That's the sort of scale, maybe a little bit bigger, but not very much bigger than that. So I'm hopefully we'll have lots of these available. They're fairly rigid bits of card that can be taped onto a board, which brings me to the next thing. It is important that you can get yourself a little board. I bought a little board ages ago, and I think it was in the Works, the shop that's in Collinswater. It's in lots of shopping centres, but the Works have a lot of cheap things. What I would never buy in the Works is the watercolor paper. Do not buy the watercolor paper or things like that, or indeed their own paints. But things like everyday things. This is a little clipboard I actually got. You can see there's a clip on the top there, so it's great. You can nearly got my hand there. You can throw in your paper, carry it around. It has a little bit at the top here, which is handy. It will take, I think, maybe up to an A4 stuck on with pieces of tape. So that stuff that I'm talking about would sit on that, and pardon me, you'd be able to tape that down and work on it, take it off, put it aside, put another one. And they're not massive, and they're really quite light. I mean, that is the thing when you're working outdoors. So have a look for something like that. It's basically a piece of MDF. You might even have a piece of MDF at home that you can get cut to that sort of size. Okay, so the size of that board, I would say, is about A2, what A2 would be. So that's a little thing. The paper or the card I mentioned, you can also, in the Works and some other shops, buy little 5 packs of these things, little painting boards. And that again might be A5, A6, A5 perhaps, maybe A6. Small, really small. You can see again the scale of it there, but it has canvas surface, and I've seen these in the Works, 5 packs of them for, I forget what it was, but not a massive amount of money, to be honest. I wouldn't recommend this sort of board if you were doing a painting for someone or for an exhibition or whatever. They're not that great quality. However, I have painted this with gesso, acrylic gesso, which you can buy, or indeed acrylic primer that you buy from B&Q, just white acrylic undercoat paint, water-based, most of it is nowadays anyway. And then what I did is stained it with a sort of a burnt sienna acrylic paint just to kill off the white. So you can sort of have pre-prepared versions of this ready in little packs if you want to go that direction. They're more rigid, they're thicker, they're more rigid and so on. But really, it comes down to your own feelings about it. This will give you a nice canvas surface. The other option, which I don't have, but hopefully you know about, are the little canvas surface paper sketch pads, canvas pads, if you like. Again, if you go to somewhere like the Works, I would maybe be inclined, maybe not to go with their particular pads. They are very delicate, let's say, and the primer that's on them is terrible, and it will make you very frustrated if you're working with oils and acrylics, certainly. So you might be better investing in a slightly better quality, going to a better shops like, I would go to Art and Home in Hollywood for most of my stuff, other than some of the things I've mentioned there. But when it comes to really getting better quality work, that's what I would be inclined to do. But that's useful. It's a bit more flimsy, so you tear it off like a sketch pad, but it can be a wee bit floppy, and sometimes if there's a bit of wind, it kind of can blow away a wee bit. There's also these little practical sort of things when we're outside. Brushes wise, well, because you're working on a small scale, brushes, I'm just grabbing some things here. These again were little synthetic brushes. You can see again the size that we're looking at there, because you're going to be working on that small scale. Again, they were cheap packets. I'm not encouraging to buy cheap materials for this exercise. What I'm saying is these might be useful, and you don't need to invest loads of money. You may already have all this stuff, so that don't worry about that. But if you don't, sometimes to invest an awful lot in high quality stuff can be frustrating, until you get the feel of painting. For those of you working in watercolors, these are soft synthetic brushes that are really very, very good. You can hopefully see if I get a wee bit closer in there. There's a sort of scale we're looking at there for watercolors and so on, and even finer ones, that little white one, tiny little white point there you can see, and various different sizes. So flat brushes and round brushes are probably fine for what we're going to do. Some of you already know there's things called filbert brushes, which are those which have a rounded top, you see that, on a flat side. If you want to bring those in, great. If you have a set, then bring great. But I have a feeling that the studies will only require the basic square and round types. For those working in watercolor, again, it's certainly better to invest in a reasonably good quality watercolor paper. Do not buy the cheapo paper from somewhere like the Works, but it's like blotting paper. That just won't work. This is one I picked up, the Langton, and it's an A3, I think that is, yeah, or A4, so A4 size. They may not be just A4, they may be different measurements, but you can see there, and it's a decent quality watercolor paper. It is, you'll know it, the weight is 140 pounds. That's 300, what they call 300 GSM. Don't panic about that, but the higher those numbers, the heavier the paper generally. So you wouldn't, 140 pounds is the least I would go. Don't go below that for thin, cheaper paper. But you can hear there, it's cardboardy, it's got a bit of rigidity to it, and it's got a nice surface. And it's a decent paper to work on, certainly for studies. And you can chop that up if you want, and then tape it to a board to do your preparatory studies on. So I'll be sending you a list of these things on paper, as it were. But I thought you might just want to be clear on the sort of things that we're going to be doing and the size that we're going to be working. Last thing behind me here is just a very important, actually. If you can, when you're working outside, you want to be working upright, ideally, with the canvas or boards in front of you. Now, in the case of watercolor, of course, you can't, or you may not want to be upright because the water runs. So you may be able to work with a board on your knees, or on a little surface in front of you, that is an angle. But generally speaking, it's nice to have an upright easel. Now you may have these. If you don't, again, you can pick them up in some of the places at a reasonable price. But sometimes I would warn you that if they're really cheap, they're very hard to tighten up, and they flop all around the place and they don't stay up, and it just frustrates. I have 2 or 3 spare that I will bring in case of emergency, so people absolutely can't get one. I don't want you rushing out and spending loads and loads of money, but it is worth finding a way to work upright. So if I come back here, hopefully you can hear me, but you can see as I have this, thing, I'm just trying to find the yeah. So you can see there, if I'm sitting here with that in front of me, my landscape's over here somewhere, so it's in my eye line, and I can paint as I look. I just glance across, paint, glance, study, boom, 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 like that. If it's down on my knees or somewhere like that, I'm looking up at the landscape, then looking down, then looking up, then looking down, and you really aren't getting the information that, or at least easily, that you want, and it physically becomes very uncomfortable as well. So if you can invest in a little lightweight upright easel, that would be brilliant. But as I say, we'll find ways around it if you absolutely can't. So what I'm going to do is going to pause this now, and then lead into the principles of what we're doing, what we're thinking about, and things that I would like you to be looking for on the day when we look at this the scenery, if you like, around us. So if you bear with me, I'll pause and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so the first thing I think when you're out in the landscape, out in the park, the workshop, will be, I would like you to think about the positioning of things. It's the most simple problem nearly that comes around. And what I mean by that is when we walk out to a landscape outside, especially if you haven't painted outside an awful lot or at all, and you go out there anywhere, you know yourself what it's like. The first thing is the expanse. The world is a very big place, so you look around and you realize, what am I painting? What do I look at here? So I always advise people, give yourself time to get the feel of the area that you're in, and don't be tempted to go wandering off for miles and miles looking for more and more, because I might find a better landscape around the corner, because hours pass, you may not find what you want, and it's kind of wasted time. There's lots and lots of lovely, rich source material and where we're going to be, and you really don't need to go very far, plus the fact that it keeps you within my range so that I can come and talk to you and give you whatever advice I can and so on. But the big thing is, when you walk out there, you think, how do I select what I want to look at? And what I did, I was down at the area and I've taken some photographs. Not only what do you select, but what part of that, because it changes the way the composition in your frame, your painting will look. And what I hopefully now I'm going to bring up some of the pictures that I took here. So if you bear with me, and I hope I have not forgotten all my skills with regards to this app, but hopefully what you're seeing there is one of the photographs I took. And I thought, when I walked there, I thought, what interested me was the lovely silhouettes or dark trees against the light sky. I thought that's a nice scene. So you'll have that gut reaction when you walk around and find something that you like. Ask yourself, why do I like it? Because this is it. If you're making a study, how do you know what information you want? The first thing you need to know is, why am I looking at this? Is it the color? Is it the light? Is it the texture? What is it that I like about this place? So I happen to choose one of these here. But then, as I look at it, it could be part or all of this. It doesn't need to be that scene that I looked at. And what I mean, I'm going to use a cropping tool. And again, some of you will be familiar with using apps on your phone to do these things, or maybe not, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But the principle is that the mood of a thing changes depending on what part we're looking at, basically. So if I, for instance, decided, no, you know what, I don't want so much of that bottom section, I don't want so much of the ground in it, I'd like to go way, way up here. And when I do that, of course, that becomes square. So let's say, okay, I'll frame it more of a rectangular thing. And I like those two trees there. That for me makes a nice picture, if you want to call it that. And you can see there's less ground, more tree. The mood is different. However, if I undo all that and go back to where I was and look at the original photo, say, well, what if I did the opposite? What if it's all about the trunks of the trees? In other words, what if I brought this down a little bit, the top section down, and brought that in a little bit to get rid of that tree on the right as well, and we look at that. Suddenly, there is more space here, and the feeling of the space here is greater. The mood changes because you have this big empty area, and your eye leads up to the little cracks of light. So you're more conscious of open and empty space, whereas perhaps the other way around, even like that, when we look at it back again, it's split half and half. There's lots of busyness up here and there's emptiness here. So I've got to decide, do you want a bit, is it the busyness? Is it all the trees that excite me? You know, do I want to get into all that? Or is it this bottom bit that's peaceful? So all of our decisions can be based on where things are placed. Is it the top or bottom? Will I focus in on one tree? For instance, like let's say I drag in and say, you know what, this is a really interesting piece of the tree here. Or let's say this little one, because it does interest the middle one. And I say, well, look, I'm going to get rid of all the other trees and say, there's my tree there. I'll obviously have to bring that down because it's a very long composition. And I think, yeah, well, you know, what about that? What about that as the bit? I just look at that today. You know, and of course, it's entirely up to you. So that's the nice thing about it. So even standing in one place with 3 trees in front of you, you have the potential to look at hundreds of different compositions just about that one particular little place without walking away to another one. And that depends on zooming in, if you like, zooming in and zooming out, moving up, moving down, move your eye line around and see what you can see. So, for example, if I can, if I went back here, hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing. I took other photographs. You can see there a pathway down towards a field or an area, whatever. And same thing applies. I could, if I want, decide, you know, what I like is the contrast between there's a big tree on this left-hand side, and then it disappears back. They disappear back. Well, what if I thought, hold on, I'll just, you know, I like the way that the big tree gives me the sense that it's in front, it's closer, and the other ones are far away. And so if we zoom in and say, well, that's the bit that I'll draw there. I'll stand here and look at that. So that is my paper, or that is my canvas, that outside frame. And I'm going to fit these things in relation to that frame, just as they are here. And all of that procedure can be followed for any pictures. And I took loads of pictures on the day. There, you know, things that, and I didn't take much time looking at them. I just thought, oh, take the photograph, worry about it later. But for instance, there's an interesting one. The trees are a reddish color, and even purpley color. And then the whole bottom section is primarily green. So maybe it might be that top section excites me more than the bottom. I don't know. And if it is, then we'll do that thing again. Say, okay, well, I'll look at that bit. Again, I'm not changing where I am. I'm just changing the bit my eyes zoom into. And there's a different composition. And I can get into the study of all this because that's what interests me. Perhaps all that other stuff is not important, you know. Sorry, I'm just refixing something here, you know. So hopefully you saw, and hopefully that is the first thing to start to think about. What do I look at? How do I look at it? And on a practical level, what simple things you know, when you're out there, you think, well, that's all very well, Sam, but we don't have a laptop and a, you know, an app to crop the photos and do all that. Of course you don't. What we can do is a couple of very simple things. Most simple of all, perhaps, is this: a little 2 pieces of L-shaped card. They're about 6 inches by 6 inches, you know. Sorry, scale it, and they can fit together like that, of course. And you can bring them out, and you can move that frame in and out, up and down. Trying to do this in front of the camera, you know, so I can create the perspective, the proportions that I want. And say, right, okay, there's the thing. I'm going to look through that, you know. I'm going to, you know, take and view the world through that and see what I can see, so on. And that can be adjusted, and you can then tape it, or you can keep it held there if you want. But even just until you establish that onto your canvas, once that's on your canvas, you've established a layout. You'll know roughly where the big tree is, and you want this and that, and then that can maybe be set down, and you can go ahead and look at your canvas in relation to your painting. And hopefully, if I can just manage the technology here, I'm gonna find a picture I hope that you're gonna see. There, that's me doing that, looking over the town, so you can see that, you know, I might want the that angle of a rooftop there, and I might like that angle because it kind of makes a nice V, and all sorts of reasons. But there, that's how you do that, okay? The other thing, which again, maybe I should have mentioned first rather than second, I don't know, is this: our phones. That's maybe the one that we'll use, maybe more than the pieces of cardboard in this day and age. We all know we can take photographs. I would say most of us, if not all, have phones. If you don't, then you can work on the other system. But you can see there, you know, I can move, you know, when I'm taking a picture, I can move my phone until I frame that section. That's the bit there. So I can do the moving, and indeed maybe the zooming in as well with the phone. So you can see me pointing at my own screen there. So I might say, oh, I like Sam down the bottom there. No, I want more background. If I don't want Sam anywhere near it, which a lot of people would say, I say, there's my composition there, or there's my composition. Right, okay, take the photograph. I can do this in reverse. It's on timer, of course. There it is, taking the photograph, and I'll bring up that there's the photograph I took. I think, right, there's my little frame there. I'll transfer that onto my canvas or paper, put the phone down, and then get on with looking at tone and some of the other things. So number one will be, the first exercise, if you like, will be, how do I compose? How do I arrange the elements in front of me on that thing that I call a piece of paper or a piece of canvas? Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and then we'll restart and talk about the next element. Okay. So we've talked a little bit there about the importance of selection. So when you walk out into this big landscape, first thing you've got to do is choose something that begins to interest you, or a series of different bits that interest you. You can stand there all day and waste an awful lot of time just staring around and picking something out. Very simple thing to do is use a little viewfinder or frame, and we can make these. And I think when you're out in that landscape, that's something that you should be doing. A couple of ways to do this. One way is to cut up 2 pieces of L-shaped card there, like that. They can then, of course, be placed together in that sort of format, and you can slide them around into different formats. So we can have a long one there, or a very square format, and so on. And you can hold that in front of you and see, you can see I'm framing my face there, or I can zoom in and make that narrower until it's less of my face, and so on. That two things. One is make sure your card is fairly rigid enough, because in the wind it can flap around. These aren't particularly strong, but it's just for demonstration. The second thing is the drawback of this system, that you've got two bits of card to be playing around with. Yes, you can hold them together with one hand, but if you're trying to draw with the other, the whole thing can get a wee bit awkward. And I think in the exercise that I would like to be doing, it's best to keep things as simple as possible, because we're going to be covering an awful lot of things. So my suggestion is just to have one piece of card cut out of a rigid piece of card. I cut this one out of an old canvas board, you know, the boards you paint on, the cheap ones. So it's quite rigid. You can actually see the paint on the back of that one. But any firm piece of card, pardon me, will do. This also I've set at a ratio of 4:3. In other words, in this case, it's I think it's 8 centimeters by 6, but it's a 4:3 ratio. I think it's because of simplicity, it's probably best to choose a format and say, that's what I'm bringing out with me today. It's going to be 4:3. So in other words, the drawings and the studies that I make on my boards and things will be 4:3. So you'll rule a line, whatever size they happen to be, they're a ratio of 4:3. Okay, so that's important. So it's in keeping with this. So what you see through this will be the same ratio as what you place on your drawing or your painting at a later stage. And I think that's the simplest way to do this. What you will notice also that I've put on marks there, marking the halfway points. If I can do this, because I'm working in reverse here because of the camera, you can see there a halfway point, a quarter point there, and the same at the top. There's the halfway along that gap. There's a quarter way, and there's the other quarter, so 3/4, whatever. So it's marked like a grid all the way around. That means you can, when you come to compose, and this is where hopefully I can do this. It's kind of awkward, you know, but it's slightly easier than doing it all outside for you on a video. However, there's my imaginary landscape. In fact, it is a photograph from the area that we might be looking at, but and apologies because it's not brilliant photograph on this camera. However, you get the idea that so we're standing there and we can then move our frame around to find an interesting viewpoint. Likewise, we can tilt it that way horizontally and we can frame up a little picture. If we hold it out further, we will see more of the landscape. You can see that as I pull it away. If we go closer to the landscape, in other words, stretch our arm away from us, we will zoom in, as it were, to smaller bits, and we can move around until we say, well, there's a piece of there's an interesting piece. It's got, you know, I like that part, or maybe look, I like the bit with more sky. Now, you know, you can choose these all day, but the practice of using these is what this is about, really. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. And once you do settle on a little frame that you would like to work on, you can see there already, if you look at my marks, you can see, for instance, okay, there's a little tree there in the middle. So it's at the halfway stage. So maybe, you know, compositionally sticking things right in the middle isn't always the best thing. So maybe we move it across. But once we settle on it, when I look at that and then I begin to draw or paint from it, when I have my painting, I know that I will place my brush. If I want the tree is, say, a quarter of the way over, so I go a quarter of the way over my picture, my drawing, as it were, and I place it there. And I might say, well, how far up does the sky meet the land? And sorry, I'm working in reverse here, but you might say, well, the land comes down about a quarter, the horizon line, let's call it, or at least the line of the hills in the distance. But so I go down a quarter of the drawing that's on my sketch pad or whatever. So in other words, it's easier to place everything because you've got a little grid there to help you along. So that is an important little piece of equipment if you're going outside to draw and paint and study, and make that and keep that. Okay, so what we're going to do then is have a think about, once you make that frame and you make that decision, how do you begin to translate it onto a study, onto canvas, or onto a piece of paper. Okay,
So here is my little viewfinder that we looked at, and what I've done here, and this is what I would suggest you can do in your own either sketch pads or on your own boards or paper that you're going to have, is to begin with, simply take the viewfinder, do what I've done there, draw around it. So that little frame, or you might do 2 or 3 of these little frames, some that way, some this way, whatever, but that is the same, exactly same size as the inner part of the viewfinder. So when I then approach my landscape and go out there and look around as I'm doing here, imagining I'm looking and saying, okay, I like this bit, or whatever it is, I'm going to set that down in this case. So there is a bit that I think, right, I'm going to have a look at this section. Well, of course, that and that are exactly the same in scale. So this is what's known as site size. You're drawing site size. In other words, you're drawing exactly the same scale as what you're seeing it on, which means then when I come to draw it or paint, the drawing or painting going to be very tiny. But the thing is, you're only working out composition here. You're not making a picture with all of the other details, which we're going to talk about later. So in other words, as I look at that, I go halfway up and say, yeah, well, the hill area sort of starts at that halfway. So I come halfway up here and I can say, okay, that sort of hill area is going to cross that way, something like that. Okay, make that a little bit darker, as you can see that. So there's that sort of line there. And I might say, okay, where's the positioning of this tree? This tree here, it's about on the quarter line. If you see that, the tree is about the quarter. So if I move a quarter, and I can mark this or judge it really, and I can say, okay, the tree that I'm seeing up here is coming out, is coming in, I should say, somewhere there. So there's that sort of tree position there, and I can place that there. I might say, what about this other tree? There's a big bushy sort of tree there. The top of it is just above the halfway line. So again, I go to halfway, just above the top. It's in about a quarter. So come in about a quarter there. And we can place that and say, well, there's the shape of that tree sitting there. So that's this tree. And you see what I'm doing? I'm just drawing them as very simple shapes. I'm not making it look like a tree. This is about composition. This is about understanding how things are arranged within a frame. And I think that's it. You learn to isolate everything else. Then what I notice here, for instance, the darker area in the background meets a light area. There's a line just there, and it's about the quarter way point. So if I go a quarter of the way up, I say, well, look, there was a line about there that I've just noticed. So put that in. And then I'm noticing just at the base of this tree, there's a little bushy tree there, which is just above the quarter point. So that's just above there. So there's that placed here. And that, I'm just putting that as a circle, to be honest with you, because I want to see how this arranges. Then maybe further down, I can see some shadows there, about slightly less, about an eighth of the way, I suppose you could call it. There's a sort of shadow area in there, and I can place that. And this is me becoming familiar with my scene, with my subject matter, by observation. The more you look, the more you get to know something or someone or some place. Okay. Now, equally, using the same idea, I might then say, well, look, I'll have a board prepared or whatever, which is bigger than this scale, but it's still 4x3 format. So this piece of paper, this piece of card that I've primed is 4x3 also. So it keeps in line with that, makes life easy. And the same thing applies then, of course, I could mark if I wanted to, halfway marks here. But to be honest, we it's surprising how accurate we can be in our own minds by guesswork. But if you mark the little markers, I need to make those darker because it's not showing on the camera so well, like that, even the halfway points, then we can say the same thing as we did with the previous one. We can say, well, there's that hill that began at the halfway point. We'll go halfway here, and we'll bring the hill over, and we follow exactly the same format as we did with this little one, on a bigger scale. So that's the use of the framework, the use of the idea of planning and laying out your composition, and that's what we're going to be doing. So here is a little board that I have prepared, if you like. It should be 4x3 format and keeping with our little viewfinder and so on. The photo that you saw a little while ago that we turned into black and white and we looked at tone is the one we're going to sort of use as a source idea. What I've done here, you can see the little ghostly light lines. I've tried to indicate approximately the position of the trees and so on. Haven't got into massive detail because this is where we get lost. So we're only focusing, remember, on the tonal values and learning about the tonal values. These studies that we make are never going to be hang on a gallery. So they will look odd, they'll look different, sometimes they'll look useful, sometimes they won't, and so on. But they are the result of us studying, so please don't get panicky about detail, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing you notice is that I had primed or prepared this little piece of card with some acrylic, which has been coloured with a little acrylic paint, just to make it this browny, pinky colour, not white. And if you're using acrylics or oils and you're going to be painting on small pieces of card like this, I think it's worth having them tinted like this so you're not painting on white. The things that I'll bring with me on the day of the exercise, hopefully I'll have time to do that. If you're working with watercolor, same thing. Before you begin your watercolor, have the paper stuck down and so on, and then put a little gentle wash of a tone over the whole paper so that the paper is just off white. It's not going to be dark, but just off white, so that when you look at the values, the tones, it's much easier to see. If you're looking at white in front of you and you're trying to gauge different shades of grey against that, the white is glaring you in the face, and you're having to fight against it all the time. Whereas when you calm it down like this, it's easier to see the relationships. Okay, so what I've done here is draw out roughly the composition. If you look at the photograph that we've been studying with those two trees, and if you remember, we half closed our eyes and looked at it. If you do that again to the photograph, one of the things that we can begin with is simplification. In other words, yes, there are lots of different little shades of grey there, but how do we break it down into the big obvious bits? And as I looked at that photograph, what I'm seeing is three major tones that we could start with. The first tone obviously is the darkest of the dark in the tree trunks. The second tone could be the lightest, which is what's coming through. You can see the gaps in the trees and the gaps behind the trees, the tree trunks, I should say. And then the third middle tone, halfway between the two, is the tone that happens within the leaves of the trees and also in the ground that's below the tree trunks. The little strip about a quarter of the way up, that little strip in the foreground, and the leaves are similar. So if we were forced to only have three tones, that's what I would be choosing in this case. So that's the way I'm going to start. So I'm going to start, in this case, I'm going to start with the darkest tone, which we believe is the tree trunks. Now, I'm mixing a dark grey here, you can see. What I'm not doing is saying, oh, is this grey? This is exactly the same as what I see in the photograph. What I'm doing is, can I get the relationships of dark, middle, and light organized? So don't panic if it's exactly that grey at the moment. What's important is that it's the darkest grey, if that makes sense. So if I was to paint in very simple flat branches here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is establish the dark. You can see it begin to happen there. The dark shapes. I'll just come down here and just organize where I think that tree trunk is there. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is simply and flatly paint in the tree shapes before I move on to the next tone. So what I have here is a very simple arrangement of what I believe are the darkest areas, the most obvious dark areas within the picture. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I think what I'll do is move on to mid-tones next. Okay, so what I'm going to concentrate on is the fact that I believe this whole area here plus the area of leaves, clumps of leaves, could be established as one single tone. Hopefully now you can see the second phase, if you like, where I've established what I believe is a middle tone. Okay, so we've dark now in middle, and what we're going to do now is establish the lightest tone, which is, as I see it, the light coming from behind the trees and also behind the tree trunks. Now what I've done there, you can see I just simply applied uh, not quite light white, but almost white paint. And I think maybe I a technical hitch with the video, which meant you didn't maybe see that happening, but I'm working on it here as we speak, because what I want you to notice is the way I've been putting the paint on. It's in patches. So I'm simplifying even the way I'm painting. I'm trying not to think of it as leaves or anything else. I'm thinking of it areas of tone. So I'm putting little patches of light at the moment in between the areas of dark and middle tone. And of course, I'm not trying to get every leaf and I'm not trying to get every clump. What I'm trying to do is observe and notice what I think I see. Okay, so the result at the minute is that what we've got is a three-tone arrangement of a picture, if you like, and that allows me to begin to decide on the subtleties. So how do I break these three tones down then into the finer variations of that? So that would be the next phase that we're going to talk about. What I'm trying to do now is to look at the picture, look at the image, and see how I could split these into smaller pieces, smaller variations. And as I'm looking at the picture, I'm seeing certain things. For example, I feel that as we go to the edges, the leaves tend to get slightly darker in tone, um, and they're slightly lighter in the middle. It's perhaps because the source of the light is maybe coming from here more. When I look down at the bottom there, I'm seeing that there are various little patches of light occurring within this area of ground. Then in this area, what I'm seeing is it is actually split into at least two things. One light area and one area above it, which is very slightly darker than that. So I know that there's loads of different tones, but what I'm trying to do is, can I split this into two or three, no more. So what I'm doing is keeping it simple and not trying to rush from 0 to 100 in one go. So for example, if I'm looking at the bottom of it here, and you can see, I hope maybe on the left hand side, me playing with the mixtures of paints and things here, colors. And what I'm saying is, for example, I'm seeing a slightly lighter gray occurring perhaps in here, and there's a bit of variation going on. There are little bits of dark going on here as well. And this is where I begin to mix and match. You can see me dipping hopefully into the different greys. So for instance, at the side here, I would like that grey to be a little bit darker. And there's a bit of a shadow coming out of this tree here, I noticed, so put a wee bit there, maybe a tiny wee bit of darkness there. What I'm noticing is that there's the edge of it. So I've split this area into 2 or 3 tones, I suppose. Just going to rinse the brush and have a look at the leaves and see, can I do something similar? Can I make up a grey? I don't want my grey to be as dark as the trees, because I've just said that they're the darkest thing. So they're my measure stick. So I need to know that the grey that I'm making up is darker than that, but not as dark as the trees. So I'm hopefully working my way on the palette there towards that. You can see me mixing it down, adding a wee bit more black to the white. I'm just using black and white, of course. So you can see there, I hope, slightly deeper tone going on, but yet it's not as dark as the trees, so, or the trunks. So I can put a wee bit of that. I believe that that side is a little more deeper there. Likewise up near the top. I'm using acrylic paint, and I probably didn't mention that, and I apologize. Simply because it's drying quickly and I'm able to paint over. Oils would be perfectly fine for this, but be aware that if you put oils on, that put them on quite thinly so you can add more paint, so they'll sit on top. If you put your first layer of oils on really thick, then it's quite difficult to keep adding color. But you can see that what I'm trying to do here is get some variation in the tones at the sides here. And of course, if we come down, as I said before, to this area here, it's actually split into 2. There's one area which is a slightly lighter grey. So I'll try to make that so that up somewhere here, there's a slightly pale grey, but it's lighter than what's below it. So I'm just going to occupy that. That kind of disappears over there somewhere. And I am going over the trees from time to time, but the trunks, but that's okay. Can come back and sort that out later, that's okay. This is all, as I say, we're not making a masterpiece for the Tate Gallery here, but you can see that now I've split that and that up. And likewise, I'm noticing over here, there's variations. For instance, a very dark patch I see there. There's a darker patch up there. Then there's a mid-tone in there, so it's not quite as light as I had it. And I think what I'm beginning to find and notice is that even some of the lights aren't as light as I thought. Some of these lights up here, they are quite light in the center area here, but back there they're maybe not quite as bright, or maybe there's more. Actually, maybe it's because there are more leaves in the way. But what I'm going to do is just take the edge of that light. I don't know if you can see that there, but those things that were nearly white, I'm just taking the edge off those little dots, so that my eye gets drawn to the more center area here. And just as maybe a matter of interest, I might say, well, what if I can lighten that? I mean, I am nearly going white here, but that's okay. As I say, it's about learning the relationships between the color, which is dark, which is light, which is middle. So I'm bringing out the brightness a little bit more in that area. But you can see, I hope, maybe as we get a bit more variation in the greys, that you maybe get a sense of form. What I'm going to do just while I'm at it is I'm going to go back and just reinforce these dark shapes and maybe make them a wee bit sharper or whatever, just to hammer that home, if you like, just those tree trunks. And basically what I've done is add another layer of tone to this. And as I look at it, I'm seeing more and more and more, of course. But it depends on how far I want to really go with this. As I'm looking, I'm seeing a couple of flecks of light over here breaking over the trees there, or the branches of the trees there. As I'm coming down I'm noticing there's a little darker edge here, just along that. And so I'm learning about the subject all the time. I'm learning about the tonal relationships all the time. I might look at that and say, oh, well, this is all too dark, or I need to maybe lighten it. But you can make these decisions. You can see that the actual picture is bordering on abstract nearly, but that's kind of nice too. But hopefully that will show you the way into learning and observing and getting studies made. You could put this aside at this point and say, yeah, I've learned this much. I know that that's dark, and I know that that actually is light, but it's got dark above it. And I remember that that had dark bits on it. So you've got that in your brain. You can put this aside, take another sheet, and maybe make another one, this time building on that. And the more you get familiar with this thing, the more information you have for painting. So here we are actually with the same setup regarding a tone, but we're working with a little bit of watercolor here. So some of you may work with watercolors. Sometimes I find I bring watercolors with me if I'm making studies of things, because they dry very quickly and they can help you get information down quite quickly, which you can then translate into oil paints later if you want to do it that way. Either way, I thought you might like to see this. It's a slightly different process, as you can imagine. I have a little sketch pad here, a little watercolor type sketch pad, not most expensive thing, but useful for carrying around. You'll notice here, actually, if I move this, there's a line across the bottom where there's a little bit extra. It was an A5, I think that is, and I've just trimmed that so that this section is 4x3. In other words, it's the same as my little frame here, my little viewfinder. So I just did that to begin with. There's very little in it, but it's worth doing anyway. Remember too that what I'm asking you to do when you go outside is at first not necessarily saying I'm matching the actual tone of what I see there. What I'm trying to get you to do is think about the relationship. In other words, what's darker than what, what's lighter than what. So if you can put the things in the right order, then you can refine the tones later on. So the first thing to say, which is the lightest, which is the middle, which is darkest, and so on, and get that down. So with that in mind, what I've done here, I'll just move this slightly, is that on this little tub, a palette, I've made up a very dilute. This is a Payne's Grey just. You could also mix up a brown and a blue, a burnt sienna and an ultramarine. It makes you like a muddy grey sort of colour. That's fine. This is a very dilute one. So if I dip that in and put a little of it there, you can, well, you can just about see, I hope, very, very, very pale sort of tone going on there. You'll notice that the sketch pad is slightly toned there anyway. It's got a yellow tint, so it may be okay anyway, but I want to go through this. This is the lightest version. Here, if I dip into this one, I've diluted that a little bit more, a little bit less, I should say, to give me a mid-tone. Okay, that makes sense. And then this one up here, you will see, hopefully, is the deeper tone coming in there to the shot. Again, just move this all up a little bit so you can see it. So I've just made up dark, middle, and light. We're working obviously in reverse this time. So what we're doing is working with the lightest tone first. What I would do is just establish the whole of the area, the first layer, if you like, as a light tone. In other words, this little one I put in, the very dilute one. So if I do that and basically create a wash over the entire area of the drawing, the study, okay, you can see, flood the water on. This is a fairly soft brush just here. You could use a bigger brush if you really want, but remember, these are preparatory studies. They're not final pieces of artwork. So I've done that. You can see that I've got a wash across the whole thing, which is slightly dark. Hopefully you can see, sorry, that should come down there as well, actually. Take that all the way down So we have that established. That's slightly off-white. You can see below that little strip the comparison, but it's not pure and absolute white, but it's light. What I'm going to do now is pause this, dry this, and then go to the next section. So now this is dry. I've just paused that magically to get this to dry. What you will notice on this little piece of paper, I hope, is very vague, pale little pencil lines. So what I had done actually, it was just indicate approximately where the trees were positioned, where the branches are going, very approximately. In fact, they're not even continuous lines, they're broken lines. They're only for me to see and understand. So when you're making studies, you're not doing it to show someone else necessarily, you're doing it for yourself. So as long as you can see where you're going to work next, that's the important thing. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to look at the mid-tones. So remember, we did this before, just simply dark, medium, light. Go look at the mid-tones, which I believed were in around the leaves primarily, and then along the little strip of ground at the bottom. Okay, so now I'm moving on to my second tonal variation, which is this one, which I'm going to call the mid-tone. So I'm just going to work on that. I'm going to take, just check that. You can see that that's going to work. So I'm placing little areas like I did just with the just fixing my camera here with the acrylic paints, and you notice I'm just putting them in patches. I'm leaving a few light spots where the leaves the light might be coming through the leaves, and they're all the way down there, so I'm seeing it as one larger area. There's a section across here, and that's why I put in the little light lines, so that later on I can find my way in to the darker tones. And we're not making a portrait of the tree here, the trees. What we're trying to do is make an excuse for us to have to study things. So what we're doing, as I'm doing this, I'm kind of learning about the subject and thinking, oh, look at that, I realize that's there, and oh, it's quite dark up there. And so this is the purpose of study. The purpose of these preparatory studies is not to make pretty pictures. That maybe not a good term, but yeah, it is the way we should think about it. We're learning all the time, We're researchers. As painters, we very often have to find out things, So in this areas, these clumps of leaves there, And now, as I say, this lower area there, I'm going to call that a mid-tone. So as I say, we're isolating three tones. Of course, there are millions and thousands of tones going on here. We know that, but what we're doing is being analytical. Okay, so I'm going to dry that magically again and come back again. And here we are, in a blink of an eye. the picture is dry again. So we can now think about the dark tone, the third one of our little study, which is going to be here. We drop there, you can see him putting a line on there. You can see it's fairly deep, not absolutely black, but really quite deep. So that's where my pale little ghostly pencil lines might come in useful now. So what I can do is I'm going to start to drop in where I believe these darker tones in. There might be a wee bit of bleeding that goes on here, but again, that's okay. What you'll notice is, of course, that the trees, the dark branches, I should say, they break up in a way. They're broken through the leaves, so we can see bits and then other bits disappear. So that's just the way I'm interpreting these here. There's a lovely sort of a curve thing going on somewhere there, that nice dark bit. There's a bit of a leaf in front of that. We'll leave a break there and then go on. Another wee bit of a break maybe there, and so on. And then there's a little thin piece coming out here. and it's fairly continuous. There's a few breaks in it, but it disappears off the top there. And then we can come down to this mid tree here, so it's sitting just on the edge of the pathway, and the branches here going up there. And you can see in that break, you can see already there's the three tones beginning to be more separated, okay, and a couple of wee broken bits there, and these very fine bits here. So you can see the way I'm approaching this is a lovely line going to kind of cross this way, broken again, disappears, broken in amongst the trees here, and then we have this little branch cracking its way across there maybe, and there's another little one that actually crosses that. It's not as dark, but as I say, I've decided to call everything dark, medium and light, so I'm not having any halfway points. Hopefully you're seeing this. I'm not getting my arm in the way because I'm left-handed. Just that's cracking across that way. There's one or two bits coming in there as well, maybe, you know, and maybe there is a tiny bit of shadow going on right underneath that, so I'll call that dark and just put that in as it is, and maybe getting a bit fiddly, but there are a couple of wee branches and things on that lower ground there. Now, if I stop there, which I should, because I just want you to see what we've got the very, very lightest of the line of the tone, the mid-tone here in amongst the clumps, and the very dark areas here. What we can do, of course, while that dark area is still damp or wet, I'm rinsing the brush with the water here. Actually, you can maybe not see that, but I've rinsed the brush. This is sort of slightly damp brush, and what I'm doing really is deciding, actually, while this can melt a little bit, I can maybe break those areas that I talked about. You see where they were broke in behind, where the branches went in behind the leaves. What I'm doing is just melting that away a little bit. So that area, this little blank bit here, what I'm doing with a tiny bit of water on it is just pushing that around, letting that break up a wee bit to see what happens, you know, so that we just don't have these empty areas. So it looks, if you like the leaves are in front of the branches, which they are, you know. And I'm just changing the tone slightly, you know, but as I'm doing this, I'm realizing there are variations in the tone of the trees anyway. So that kind of works for me. And these little empty bits here, it takes very little on the brush. On this brush, it's barely damp, but yet look how it's melting the paint there. Depends on your paper and all sorts, but I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is that you know, get loads of water on every time, which is not necessarily necessary. And we can sort of see there how we're now almost shrouding these branches behind the leaves a bit more here, you know. And again, there comes a point where you've got to be careful. You just load so much water on it that it just becomes very messy. One of the things I remembered was that back in the little distant area here, there's a little bit more depth there. So like I did with the acrylic paints, I'm now beginning to, I suppose, refine things or add a few more tones in. But remember, in the case of watercolor, we've got to be careful that we don't flood it too much. We're going to let it dry a little bit. So maybe what I do now is allow that to dry. So I'll just pause it again. So this little study is drier. It's maybe not completely dry, but it's much drier. And now what we've got is the most extremes, the most obvious dark, the most obvious light, and I suppose, if you like, the most obvious middle tone. Now when I look at the image in front of me, or my scene in front of me, what I'm beginning to realize is, you know, some of those leaves are actually darker. The light is cracking through more dramatically. So really, some of my, what I call mid-tones, can be brought down. So this is why you begin with the base tones and then make adjustments. With watercolor, it can be a wee bit more fiddly, but what I'm doing here, this mid-tone that I made up at the very beginning, in other words, the mid-tone that was on these leaves right there, I'm going to put another layer of that on. So obviously if I put a second layer, so there are parts, for example, here, as I'm looking at this study, I'm seeing this top corner feels as if it should be a little deeper here, you know. So I'm going to put areas of a deeper tone, almost like a wash over this. You can see I'm just tapping that on, and I'm leaving this area for the moment because I'm seeing the darker tones need more of the top. And likewise up this top left hand corner, I see that there seems to feel there's more heavier, shadier sort of a thing going on there. And there's an area of little leaves sliding down the middle there, and again one or two patches of darker. So as I look, I'm sort of trying to patch in where I think I see bits that are darker than they actually were. In the middle area it seems to get lighter. The tones aren't as dark as these edges, if you like, so we'll maybe leave that for the moment. I'm trying not to be putting tiny little dots on. I don't want to, you know, I'm not worried about whether they look like leaves at the moment. What I want is, can I get areas of tone? That's all we're talking about. You can see even now that this is create a little more variation within the tone, and maybe help the sense of light up here come through a wee bit more. And with that in mind, I'm moving down and thinking, well, you know what? This whole area here isn't that light really. So I'm going to wash it over with the same mid-tone. So 2 layers of mid-tone give you darker tone, you know, as you layer these things one on top. So you can see now I've taken away the lightest area here, which is drawing my eye up now. I'm more inclined to feel that there's light going on there. In doing that, I suddenly realize, hold on, this lower section, this here, then maybe does have to come down more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little more of the dark tone to what I've got. Probably going to need to mix up some more fairly soon. But, you know, in other words, I think, hold on, this little area of grassland or whatever this is here is darker than, so I can make my judgments now. And in doing so now, my eyes going more up into the central area where the light is. There is also a little thing going on there. There's another little light bit followed by a slightly darker area up here. So I'll just do that. Sort of a little at the edge of something in the distance there. So I'll put a wee strip right across there. And may not be the case, but you can see that there's a light area, dark light, and so on. And what we're doing is beginning to get a greater sense of light coming through the trees. I could continue with this. I could, you know, fiddle, in other words, which is a dangerous thing to do. But, you know, I could start dropping in little darker areas in here. But then if I do that, what I'm turning into is a study about textures and branches and leaves. And it's not that. It's a study about light and shade. So at this point, what I might be better to do is to move this aside, take another piece of paper and maybe do the same thing and build on my knowledge and memory and think, next time I'll add more information to it. Or perhaps shift your viewpoint, take your little viewfinder, move around and look at another view of a tree or a field to the left or to the right and do this to that as well. So with watercolor, this is the way you maybe approach the tonal studies. And just as a final little postscript to this, what I did there was I let this little study dry, and then as it dries it tends to lighten out sometimes, which it did. So what I did was I had another look, went back and worked another layer of dark over the top of the tree area. So as I studied the photograph, the image, I began to realize that I could afford to come down. So again, push the tones down. That allows more sense of light to come through the middle area. and also down in here I darkened it slightly more, but I still tried hard to maintain the difference between the darkness of the tree and the darkness of the foreground area and the leaves themselves. So there still is a dark medium and light going on. All I've done is push them all down, as it were, incrementally all together. And what I did was then I darkened, put another little layer of quite strong dark into the tree trunks and reinforced some of the branches that were dark and had been lost underneath the other tones. So it's still possible to keep working and working and refining until you're happier with the tonal range.
Okay, so the next problem, if you like, after tone will be color. You'll start to observe outside and make decisions about the types of colors you see. Now, this is the same issue as tone. Do not get yourself bogged down on the thousands of colors that exist in front of you, because there are thousands and more. Split it into big blocks, just as we did with tone. So if you remember that little piece I did there with the trees and the silhouettes, 3 tones, and then we started refining that. So we can do a similar thing with color so that you can get to know the colors in front of you. Now, what I've done is I've taken the same picture that we use for our tone, and I'm going to show you in a second, and I'm going to look at the principles of how we change those colors. You may or may not know, but the 3 areas that you're going to adjust are the value, the brightness of the color. Is it light or dark? Then you're going to look at the temperature of the color. Is it warmer or colder? In other words, which side of the spectrum does it lean into? Do you need to make it yellower or redder or bluer, depending on the temperature? And the third thing is grayness or chroma, the richness of the color. Is it highly saturated, rich color, or is it a very gray version of that color? And they are the 3 dimensions that you can concentrate on. So if you bear with me, what I'm going to do, I hope, is bring up this image here. This is me having zoomed in to the picture that we were looking at earlier there. So in other words, that's the image we're looking at. But I just wanted to zoom in mainly to get into the color thing. Now, yes, you look at these leaves, there's lots of different colors going on, but let's look at a general color. If you half close your eyes, just as we did with tone, it will tend to meld the colors together and give you, if you like, some sort of an average color, you want to call it that. So in the case of the leaves, let's say we want to get somewhere in the type of color for that bunch of leaves there. So if I bring up this little device here, okay, and let's not get too concerned about the technicalities of it right now, but what I wanted to show you is this, that if we look at the leaves there on the right side of this box, and then we look at this color that we happen to have in this box at the moment, okay, you might squeeze out of a tube of acrylic or indeed watercolors or whatever a certain color. Let's say it's a sap green or a viridian green, but let's say sap green. Sap green is somewhere around that, maybe a bit less, but let's say you squeeze that out onto your palette. So in other words, the first thing you do is you look at those trees and say, what's the closest color I have in my palette? Look in your or in my bag, if you like, look in your bag. There it is. The closest color I have to what I'm seeing in the trees is that sap green or that viridian or that whatever it is you happen to have, or indeed you might mix it up with yellow and blue, and you know that you're starting with green. That's the main thing. Okay, so the first thing is value, tone, brightness. So we look at this color, let's say, and we look at the brightness. Again, half close your eyes, like we did with tone. And if you do that and compare these 2 things, I think that we want to bring that tone down a bit. We want to get a little bit darker, okay? So we'll bring, I'm going to bring down, you can see the box, you'll see it changing, becoming darker as I move down very slightly. And we're going to stop there, let's say, and we're getting closer. My next question is temperature. Which is cooler, the subject or my box. I think we hopefully will agree the subject is a cooler green, that slightly yellow side. So what I'm going to do then, imagine me adding some blue to my paints. And you'll see, I hope, this little green going slightly colder. You can see it changing there to a cooler, slightly bluer green. I'm going to stay with that at the minute. And then we might say, okay, we've got it more like the temperature of the color, the slightly bluish green, but is it a rich color? Is it grayer? And again, you look at it hard, you'll see that the greens that are in those trees are grayer. So in this case, you're going to add a complementary color. Sorry, just get that back to where we had it near enough. We're going to add a complementary color, which in this case is red. The complementary of green is red. So you can stir in a little crimson red in terms of paint. And what will happen as I slide this across, you can see that this is the same as the addition of red. Watch that color going disappearing nearly to gray there. I'll come back a little bit and think, yeah, that's a bit more gray. What I think now, when I've adjusted it, I think that's still a bit cold. I've gone a wee bit too far. So let's warm it up with a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to bring the yellow back into it slightly. You see that? And I'm still trying to do that very slightly. I'm going in about there, and you can see, I think we're getting closer. I'll move that over to some of these leaves here. So you can see, again, if you slightly half close your eyes, you'll see we're getting closer. Perhaps even a wee bit more warmth in that slightly there. Look, and I think we're really, really close. Now, this exercise, this whole process is not about, oh, I can match every color brilliantly and that's good. It is important. What is the purpose of it is to get your mind to think this way when you're outside. Imagine when you're outside, the weather might be against you. You've got to make a decision quickly on what color am I seeing there? What color do I want on my canvas here or on my paper? And you could stir paint around all day and try and get it and so on, and time would go on. But if you have this framework and follow that process, it will be easier. Okay, so for instance, we'll do it one more time. If I just cancel that, look, I'm going to zoom out because I want to show you another section here. If I zoom back in, sorry, and if I can move this up and look at that lower section, look at that color we had on that lower section. I think this color here, you know, I know there's variations, but generally speaking, you know, let's take the middle section, might be easier, that area. I think, what color would I start with? I could start with a brown, I suppose. You know, we'll start with a burnt umber or raw umber or something like that. So let's do that. Let's try that. I'm going to bring up what is basically, I think, a reddish umber color there. Look, you see it there, and put it beside it. We know that's not the right color, but we're going to try to fix that. Ask ourselves, is it too dark or too light? It's too dark. I think it has to come up a little bit. So let's lighten that. Okay, so there we're bringing the lightness up to be similar in tone. But we realize, of course, that's now become very warm. It's much bluer, purpley, muddy. So let's move it across. You can see the slider moving that across to the purple side of things. I'm going right across it. That's very purpley. So we want to drain the color. That's too rich. So let's desaturate. In this case, a color like purple, if you add yellow, this is what will happen. It'll go that way. You can see it happening now. That's what happens when you add yellow to a purple tone. And I can keep on going. I'm keeping on going until it's nearly gray there. But I am getting closer to the color that exists in that little particular area there, this shadowy area there. If I come over here, if I can bring that over there and say, no, hold on, that's a warmer version of that. Let's try to warm it up now. So I'm making it warmer, adding wee bits more red, but it's already been drained out, you see. And you can see that we're coming more and more and more in that little box closer to the colour of the ground that we see. So this is following those three steps: brightness, value, temperature, saturation, also known as chroma, richness of colour. Okay, so that's something that we're going to look at in terms of mixing our paints now. Okay, so I'm going to move on to that issue next.
So what we're going to do here is apply this, if you like, colour theory to our little study. What I want to do is just break it down the way I broke down the tone. I'm going to concentrate on 3 or 4 general colours, okay, not all the little dots and things like that. And I'm going to work with some oil paints here. In the case of oils and acrylics, usually better to start with the deeper tones and work away from that. So what I'm going to do obviously is begin with the deeper tones that are in the trees themselves, okay. So as I look at the trees, and again apologies, the image that you're seeing is probably quite small and it's hard to match, so you're going to have to trust me that I'm perfectly accurate and I can get away with murder, but hopefully not. Basically what I'm going to do is try to match what I see, but the process is more important than the product. It's what I want you to see how I'm doing it. This is burnt sienna. I just pulled this out of my sort of box of paints. It's a brown. I'm looking at those trees. Yes, they're sort of brown, but they're not burnt sienna. We do tend to think of trees as being brown, but they're very rarely just brown. But just to let you see, if I begin with burnt sienna, you can see how reddish it is. And it's far too red, of course. So remember, we're going to be playing with temperature soon. But the first thing I know is it's dark, okay? So I'm not going to lighten, I'm not going to add any white at this point in time. What I'm going to do is go straight to temperature and look at the fact that it's colder than that. It's not a reddish brown. So I'm going to take a little ultramarine blue. I'm going to add that in. It's a very dark blue, as you know. And so when I add it into that sienna brown, you can see hopefully the difference in the left and right hand sides. As I put more blue over towards the right hand side, you can see how that's changing into a very neutral sort of colour. It just has a brownishness to it. I'll maybe scoop in a little bit of brown, you know, but it's given me a fairly deep tone. And I'm going to start with that again, like the tone we put in the ballpark decisions, and then we work from there. And again, it's not going to be a painting for the wall. This is a study, so I'm putting this down in blocks. I'm sure I'm going to make more of this up actually. I'm sure my drawing is not accurate, but this is not about drawing at this point in time, okay. I'm going to put those areas in there. No texture, no concern for detail at all. I'm just making a note for myself here. Some people actually do this mix studies, and that's an idea if you really want to. You can look at your subject and try to, you know, look at the colours you have, mix them up and put them on a little sketch pad or a little board, patch by patch, like little colour cards you see in B&Q or somewhere. And you can write beside that trees to the left, you know, lower section, so you know that belongs to the tree there and so on. So you can do it that way as long as you're getting the information down. So I'm going to block this in here. I may not start do every single thing here because as I say, we want to move on, but so you can see the idea that I'm establishing those deeper cold colours. They're not just about brown or edging towards even being grey blue and so on. There's a bit of a branch up here, goes all the way around there. not putting the paint on too thick. It allows me to change it later on, you know. To say it will, I'm sure it will need adjustment, because the first thing you do is never absolutely perfect, you know. I'll just put a wee indicator of that one in there, look. Leave it at that. For the moment, we're going to say, look, let's leave it at that. Okay, what I'm going to do is pause, clean up my palette a bit, and let's look at the mid-tone now, which again we agreed was maybe mostly in the greens of the leaves and the ground. What I'm going to do now is have a look at the greens, the area of greenery near the top. I thought it might be nice just to begin with a base green rather than out of a tube green. We'll mix a simple green with yellow, lemon yellow, ultramarine blue, and you can see what you know what we get. We get a large amount of really quite a vibrant sort of a green there, you know. But that's our base color to make adjustments from. The first thing that I'm going to look at again is the tonal values. Is the green lighter, paler, if you like, than what I've got or not? I don't think it necessarily is. Certainly the image that I'm looking at isn't. It might even be slightly deeper, you know. The next question I'm going to ask myself, is it yellower or bluer than what I have here? Well, it's certainly not as vibrant yellow as that. So we're now going to adjust the temperature. We will find actually as we do that, we're darkening it obviously because blue is a dark color. So you can see there that's become a bluer green than we started with, but slightly deeper. And I think that I would like that not quite as deep as that. So we bring it up then. So we can keep sliding the sliders, the adjustments, you know, the three knobs, the three sliders up and down and go back and forward and so on. So now we'll lift that slightly. You can see how that I'm leaving that there so you can compare how the change is happening. So we've lightened that up, but it's still a fairly, you know, strong color. But it's I'm a wee bit happier with the lighter. I'm viewing this as I'm painting. I'm viewing it on a computer screen, so it is going to give me different, you know, effects if you like. What I do know is that green is still really quite severe, you know, in terms of it's. I'm just adjusting the camera in terms of the richness. So now we're looking at chroma, richness. This is too much. How do we dull it? We can dull it by adding a little of the complementary color. If you go to the color wheel, you look at green, go to the other side, and you'll find red. You'll see there that that red is very dark. And if I dip that in there, I'll darken the color that I achieved. So what I'm going to do is take the red over. I'm going to scoop a little bit of white into it so that I lift this red up to be the same or similar tone, closer in tone to what I've just mixed up there before I add it in. And when I do add it in, adding it in tiny amounts, and you can see, I hope, how that's moving that green over to a much less rich green. What it tends to be doing though is warm it up. I've probably added a wee bit too much red there. So then I'll cool it then with a little bit of blue. And you can see I'm bringing that back to a slightly cooler color. So it's now cooler and it's much less rich. It's duller. So I could begin to apply the greens. Like I say, I might not do all of this because you get the idea, but you can see, I hope, some of the greens going on there. And the greens are different. I can block that all in just as I did with my tonal study, so I can do that. And as you say, there's a difference if I go back to the green that I started with, pretty much with blue and yellow, good old blue and yellow here, just to let you see. And if I put that beside that, look, you can see the richness of that and the subtlety of that. So that's how we did it, made those adjustments. So I'll not take the time to do the whole thing, to be honest. I think that might be, counterproductive. Let's look at this section here then, and we'll look at that. That again is an interesting color. As I say, we've looked at it before. You could argue that it's a sort of a browny color, okay? So if you're starting to make a ballpark decision, let's say we start with brown. We'll start. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to start with, and hopefully I have enough space here rather than cleaning. This is actually an umber, which you can see is a cold brown. It's not like the burnt sienna. It's a very cold brown, very, very dark, obviously. So the first thing we want to do is say, well, it's not as dark as that. It's a little bit lighter. So we'll put a wee bit of white in there. You can see it coming up there. We'll make a wee bit more of it in terms of the amount. So you can see there's a lighter version. And I can move that until I get to the tonal value that I think this area is. Now, the next thing, what about the temperature? Well, when I look at what I'm saying, it's not as brown as that. It's not as warm. It's a cooler, grayer experience. So we'll scoop a tiny little bit of blue in there. You can see what's happening to it. The blue is turning that brown. Still brown, but a grayer brown. And some of it is, quite cold, really. And if I need, and I think I've gone too dark, I can lighten, increase the value again until I get something like that. And actually, when I look at that, there's parts of this area has slightly purpley tone, so maybe I've gone too cold. So we slide the temperature up again with a little bit of our crimson there, with a wee bit of white already in it. So we're bringing that up. And you see the sort of colours that I'm getting. That might even be lighter, but you can see as I put that down, the sort of colours I'm getting there, Could increase the purple content. We could say, it is more of a purplish tint, so let's do that, blue and red. And then I'll bring it up with the light again, and we can have different colours like that. So we'll block that in as a point. So we've got a tonal difference as well as a colour difference beginning to happen to give us our base there. And then in here, for example, just above the ground, there's another type of green. If you notice, there beyond the leaves, beyond the trees in the distance, there's a hazier group of trees you can see through the branches of the foreground. So let's say we begin as we did up here this time. So what I'm going to do, just being lazy with my palette, but I'm going to make up that green, or near enough similar sort of green again, a green, any sort of green. Say, well, there's our green, but there's no way that matches what's going on in here. This is a very pale experience, okay? So we know that the first thing we want to do is bring that right up in terms of whiteness, lightness. Very, very pale. In fact, I'll push it quite light there, you can see. It's still the wrong green. It's maybe getting closer to the correct brightness, but it's far too peppermint green. You can see that, It's a cooler green as I look at it. It's not as yellow as that. So let's put a little blue in. And again, if you add a bit of white to the blue, you'll bring the blue up to the same tone. You can do it that way or add the white later, but you do have to retain your tone all the time, retain the brightness of the colour. So we're now getting a wee bit cooler. I'm going to push it a bit more because I do think it's really, really bluish green. And a wee bit more white there, so you can see what we're getting now. But it's still, temperature-wise, I'm happier, but it's still not grey enough. So we need to grey it down now. We need to dull it using complementary colour. Now, what we have here is a bluish green. And if you look at the colour wheel, you'll find if you go to blue-green and you go round to the other side, you'll see an orangey yellow, or sorry, an orangey red, beg your pardon. So crimson alone, it might be that we make up, I'm just again being lazy with this brush, but a little bit of lemon yellow here, look, tiny wee bit of red. And what we're doing is making this slightly orangey red, adding it into the the color here, and just dulling that down. I hope you can see it becoming duller. You know, it's muddier now, but it's getting too warm. It's warmer as I do that, I've just realized. So I'm gonna change the temperature, cool it with blue, and then add our reds and yellows to grey. So you can see, actually, as I add the red, it's getting grayer and grayer and grayer. And then we can maybe lift that up a little bit. And we put, if we see this color going in there compared to the previous one, you can see that I'm getting a much cooler, duller thing going on. And I think it could be even grayer than that, to be honest. So we could keep adding the complementary. Seems to be this particular red's working a wee bit better. It's going way, way too far there, look. So we'll just warm it or cool it down again. So I can pull, if I go too far and I go, oh my goodness, it's gone very red. Generally then, if I go to the cold, then I can pull it back close to where it was, or into that sort of range. So you can see the sort of colors, look, that I'm getting here are nice and muted and cold, and play off what's in the trees there and so on. So there's a difference between the leaf color, the foreground trees, the distant trees, and the trunks of the trees here. So that's what I want you to think about, adjusting those three elements when you're mixing these studies. Now, in terms of watercolor, the same business of color mixing applies. Value, temperature, saturation. You're going to achieve it in a slightly different way, of course. What I mean by that is, if I take some colors here, red, yellow, blue, and so on. If I take some blue here, because it's a nice dark color to start with. If I obviously put an area on there of blue, it's going to be a certain value, a certain darkness or lightness. In the case of watercolor, of course, it's a matter of adding more water to create a slightly lighter tone. And it's not as immediately visible when you have a pot of watercolor here. When you look at that, it's very difficult to see that will look like that when it comes onto the page. In the case of oils, what you see in the palette is very accurate, so you can see it quite clearly, and that's what you get. Whereas because of the nature of water and the fact it sort of forms bubbles like this and so on, it's a different experience. So little scraps of paper beside you are very helpful, like this, that I can put on and try it out before I apply it to my study. But as a sort of rule of thumb thing, just a matter of interest, if I put that more blue on there and make a strong blue again, you see that? A very simple thing can be, I haven't touched that brush, the blue's still on this brush, okay? What I'm going to do, I don't know if you can see, I'm dipping it into water. So I'm going to dip it twice, scrape the brush a wee bit on the edge, put that on. Hopefully you're seeing this, I think. Not doing anything again, dip it twice again, scrape it again, put that on. Do you see it getting lighter? Lighter. Dip it twice again, scrape the brush. We're getting lighter again. And obviously, each time I'm removing a little of the blue. So I'm getting a nice incremental change in the tone. But that is basically, the water will create lightness in watercolors, as you probably know. But I think the thing to remember is how little paint sometimes you need. Watercolor can be deceptively strong, but have little scraps of that if that helps you. Now, the color mixing is the same theory as well. So what I mean by that, let's say we take a little yellow here on there, a little scoop of blue, and we make you know, a strong sort of green up there. We'll put that on there. It's quite a yellowy green, so maybe increase the blue a little bit more. We'll do that, yeah. So we can see a green like that, which is kind of like a slightly lime green, you know. But we can change it. If it's too warm, as it maybe is there, we can add blue, okay. Remember that if we want it lighter, we just add more water. So this turns to that, that becomes that. And I can add more and more blue if I wanted to, or I can go the warmer way and so on. Then if we want to drain that, in other words, if we feel that's too strong, we'll use the same principle as before. I'm just rinsing the brush here. I'm going to add tiny little scoop of red here, the crimson red. It says crimson red in this, but it's slightly cadmium, but there's barely a little bit on that brush there. Again, you can obviously add some more water to that, but that tiny bit of red, let's put it beside the one we've got, and you'll see it's very slightly earthier. Put a little bit more, and a little bit more. So as I add a little bit more of the complementary color, the green becomes a muddier, less rich color. Now, if it becomes a wee bit warm, you can see it's going to a rusty color. Then, of course, I can counteract that with a little more blue and then take it over to that color. So you can see that that's a grayer, less rich green than the top one, and it's a colder color. So the red desaturates, the cold is cooling it. I keep adding blue there if I wanted to. So having desaturated, I know that my greens will all be that bit earthier. And of course, then if I add more water, as I'm doing here, hopefully you can see that, you can see that I'm getting a paler version of that. And we can do what we did along the top, which is keep diluting that color and get very, very subtle, lovely greens, just off greens, compared to the rich ones here. So that principle applies also to watercolor technique.
So what we have looked at here are three main areas: layout and composition. Second one is tonal values, brightness, darkness, basically. Third one is color, the brightness of the color, the temperature of the color, and the saturation or the grayness of the color. And those three areas are what you're going to look at when you go out to study and make studies from the landscape. If you have information about those three things, you're well on your way to producing your own painting, maybe at a later stage, using those studies. How you do that and the style that you do that and so on becomes very much up to you. But fundamentally, you'll have all that information which will help to guide you to make the painting that you want. So hopefully this video has been of use to you, and hopefully watch it if you can at least once or twice before you go out into the landscape, so that on the day you'll be ready to do these things, these three exercises, if you like. And hopefully, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy the experience very much as well.